From Perth, Australia, and broadcasting around the world, you're listening to The O Show with your host, Oren McCory. The O Show is a no-nonsense podcast bringing you the best advice on training, mindset, and nutrition to supercharge your efforts in the gym, the kitchen, and most importantly, in your head. Don't forget to share this episode on your social media. Now, let's get to it.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, guys. Welcome to today's episode of The O Show. I am your host, Oren McCory, and you are on episode 51. We are nearing our goal of 52 episodes by the 1-year anniversary, which is actually Saturday. This is Wednesday evening, and I'm speaking to my good friend who is from Perth, but he's actually in Denmark at the moment. It's my good friend, Caelan from CPT Perth. How are you, Caelan?
Fantastic. How are you?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. So people will be hearing that we know each other and you're now in Denmark. You're from Perth. Let's talk quickly about that because I called you batshit crazy for it, but you decided in the middle of the pandemic where all of Europe is pretty much locked down, Perth is clear. We had 1 week of lockdown over here and you decided to move to Denmark for a little stint. Tell me why. Talk to me about it.
Yeah, it was fun, wasn't it? Actually, before I left, I went to Lululemon and I saw they had those little masks there, and I grabbed it. I was like, oh, that kind of looks cool, just in case we go into lockdown. And then ended up jumping on a flight a couple of weeks later, and I have had to use it pretty much every day. So it's probably one of the best things I've spent in a while. I moved over. I met a girl in Australia, and her visa ran out, so I ended up having to come back to Denmark kind of through the pandemic. We made the long distance work, and then after a while, I kind of just spat the dummy and ended up having to come over to Denmark. Just wasn't really fond of the long distance. So long story short, ended up coming over to Denmark, leaving the safe haven of Australia. And it's been interesting, especially having to, remember to wear masks everywhere and stay away from people. And it's been fun though. It's been fun. I wouldn't trade it in for the world, that's for sure.
That's awesome, man. And it's very ballsy doing that for love, right? And just saying, right, because you trained at Doherty's, like no doubt the best gym in Perth. You had a successful PT business at, was it Jets in Bassendean?
Bassendean, yeah.
Yep. And you decide, let's up and move to somewhere I'm gonna have to train with bands every day and do running and stuff for my cardio, and I'm gonna have to move my whole business online. That's a ballsy move, mate. So how's that been?
Yeah. It definitely was a change at the start. The whole gym thing, I think, was probably the biggest struggle because I kind of set my daily routines around the gym. So that made it a bit hard at the start. Just changing my goals from, my bench and my dead to getting good running times. And like you said, using the resistance bands and stuff like that. But it's been good because it's pushed me into a place where I wasn't necessarily comfortable. And as most people know, you're going to grow the most when you're not necessarily comfortable and you have to adapt to a new situation. So that in itself was definitely worth it. But I do miss Doherty's. Definitely miss Doherty's. The bands are getting tired.
Yeah, man. Yeah, well, it won't be long till you're back there. But I've just got to commend you because your business has actually went from strength to strength since you've moved over there. And we're going to talk more soon about your change of niche and kind of where you're going with everything. But I remember we used to do business mentoring and you were building up the gym and the online, and it was both going well, but you never really fully went in. And now you've went fucking all in on online and you're doing very, very well out of it. So taking that ballsy move and saying, you know what, let's pack in the gym, let's move across the world and let's move fully online. It's paid off, man. And you're using your time very wisely because like we said, you're kind of changing your whole niche and you're speaking more to females. And it's nice to talk to another, because my main focus is probably females as well. I do a little bit of males, but like it's mainly females who come to me. It's good to have another male coach on the podcast who coaches females. So let's talk about that. Like, what inspired the change of market for starters? Because you're going in quite deep, and if guys, if you haven't seen, you've probably seen this on my story where I've tagged Caelan multiple times because he's doing these awesome infographics. He's putting loads of content together, and it's very aimed at females around menstrual cycles, menopause, PCOS, like really in-depth topics, which I feel you've got a really good grasp of. So why go into that market like all in? I'm sure you were the same as me. You coach some guys as well, because people will relate obviously to you as a guy that want to, get big arms like Caelan, or, they want to look like Caelan or be like Caelan. So like, why go all in on females? Why is that your passion, and why are you driving your business that way?
Yeah, good question. Well, mainly because I'll give you a bit of a rundown, right? So a previous housemate of mine, she was suffering with endometriosis, and she was actually a client of mine before we kind of became housemates. And so we were training and kind of everything was going well. And eventually we got to a point where her symptoms just started ramping up. And it kind of annoyed me because I like to be, with my ADHD and my OCD, if I don't know something, I have to kind of I dive into it, and I dive into it deep because I need to kind of figure out so I can essentially just, help. And the more I dove into it, the more that I realized, and Stacey Sims has like this really great quote, it's women aren't small men. Mm-hmm. And even like a simple quote like that, it really kind of emphasizes the reason why I dove into it, because the more I looked into it, I was like, okay, well, it's not just about, say, in her specific case, it's not just about, trying to eat less to minimize these symptoms or missing certain food groups. It was aligning the food that she was eating with the hormonal fluctuations that she was kind of experiencing, or the deficit of hormones, to essentially help and kind of minimize the symptoms. And the more that I looked into that and started kind of helping a little bit, we started kind of seeing a little bit more results, and started seeing a bit of a I guess you call it like an increase in productivity, or like a decrease in her symptoms. So that was kind of the first tick in my box where I was like, okay, this is cool. This is something I really want to dive into. And then I think most PTs could probably reciprocate with this, is like, you've had, say, a female client and they just don't respond as well to, say, like certain dietary protocols. Like, the thing with training men is it's boring, right? You give them macros, you give them a program, and then they just it's going to work, right? But with females, because, there's 4 different, if they've got a standard cycle, there's 4 different versions of that person within the month. And they're going to kind of react to diet, to exercise, to stress, all these different things differently. So as soon as I started kind of getting down that rabbit hole and helping clients that I had in the gym kind of understand this, the more I started to get a little bit more results with those clients. And the more I started being kind of told by the girls that I was talking to, the females I was talking to, is they're like, how come I don't know about this sort of stuff? And even when I was doing free consultations, I'll dive into it just that little bit. And they're like, wow, how do you know so much? But that was only kind of scratching the surface. So it was more probably alarming to me that this sort of stuff wasn't like taught. I think it is a little bit more in America, but especially in Australia, like, females don't really know about this sort of stuff. And I think a lot of them train themselves as small men, but then they kind of beat themselves up a little bit when things don't work. So I guess, long story short, it was just me wanting to try to help people. But it was just really fascinating. As soon as you kind of dove into one wormhole, there was like 10 different ones. Like, you dive into estrogen, and then there's like different forms of estrogen, and then like the levels of estrogen that they have throughout their cycle. And it's it was just a roller coaster ride that the more I kind of went on, the more I wanted to stay on.
Awesome, mate. And I think you're well suited to it because, like you said, you do have that ADHD, that addictive personality, that OCD sort of that drives you in all your life, right? So I can imagine I can nearly imagine what's going through your head, because I know you quite well at this stage. Like, when that flatmate, that roommate, then came and these symptoms were getting worse, I can nearly imagine your brain taking in, like, you're like, I need to understand why the fuck is this happening. I need to know exactly why this is happening. And I can nearly see the cogs going in your brain with diving into that. I mean, it's huge, like, to have, because let's be honest, like, women understand women better than us, right? But not everyone wants to train with a woman. Some women want to go to males because they're less bitchy, or less, they might be perceived perhaps as less like more approachable and like less judgmental. For whatever reason. Again, that's the person. Seeing whether some people will just want to train with female coaches, some will want males. So it's good to have male coaches who want to know this stuff. I mean, I would say your knowledge is higher than mine. I've no issue with saying that, but I've dug into this more than probably most coaches, and it's refreshing to see that with another male coach, because most people don't want to know this, or they just want to know, how to get them shredded, and it's only down to calories and just eat less, like you said, rather than what you said there, which I actually wrote down, was you worked out how to eat to sort of minimize the symptoms with her endometriosis, which was massive. So let's dig into that before we go any further. Like, this is endometriosis. I knew I was going to trip on that word. Endometriosis. Yeah, it's one of those nasty little words. I said it perfect the first time. I was like, damn it, I'm going to get that wrong later. So endometriosis, it's something that kind of is more of the forefront in Australia. I know people in the UK who, like, it's pretty much blanketed where it's not a thing. It's thought of that it's not a thing. It's really big over here. And it's something that I noticed moving over from Glasgow, 3 years ago now. That I was like, oh, everyone's like got this endometriosis and they're talking about it a lot. I'm like, where's this come from? Because it's just not a thing in the UK. And I think it's because the education here seems to be better. So let's talk about what it is. And after we talk about what it is, if you could dive in a little bit about with that one person, and obviously it's not going to fit everyone, but what did you maybe do with that housemate of yours to get her feeling better?
Yeah. And it is kind of weird. And the more women that I've kind of come across that have been diagnosed with this, a lot of them do say that they were kind of dismissed. And I think that happens a lot with a lot of female-based issues. So like polycystic ovary syndrome, endometriosis, like all that sort of stuff. It's generally misdiagnosed. I mean, even my girlfriend at the moment, we're trying to get her tested, and over here they almost refuse to, and they just keep feeding her with painkillers, which is frustrating in itself. But so endometriosis is essentially this. I don't really like using the word disease because it kind of it just sounds crap. But for lack of a better term, it's this disease that kind of builds up in the reproductive organs of a female, and it can kind of jump to other organs as well. But it makes kind of being pregnant or conceiving a hell of a lot harder. But then on top of that as well, like you get like massive cramps. It just makes like your hormone profile just like completely out of whack. And then that in itself, changing your hormones, say like taking contraceptive pills, for example. If you change your hormones, there's going to be its own side effects. Like some females take it because it helps clear up their skin, right? Which I mean is great superficially, but then they're at a high risk of like heart disease. They're at a high risk of blood clots, potentially hair loss. It can ravage you. So endometriosis essentially is unfortunately something that isn't, you can't really recover from it. You can just minimize the symptoms as much as you can to a point where you can live as comfortable as you can. As far as like the diet, it can be a little bit tricky. Fortunately with her, and at least initially, we were going really, really well. It seems that cutting out carbs as much as you can, going for like a keto-based diet, even though, disclaimer, I'm not, a keto zealot, if you will. I'm not going to push it if you don't need to. But that seemed to really lower the symptoms, just with the way that it kind of influences insulin spikes. But then on top of that as well, they also suggest looking for foods that don't influence hormones as much. Obviously, eating everything is going to influence insulin to a certain level, to a certain degree. But even say eating chicken, for example, they recommend to maybe stay away from chicken and look at eating more fish, because they say that chicken in itself can help, can raise your insulin levels and your hormones a little bit. So it's really tricky, and I'm not going to sit here pretending like I'm a professor. I definitely don't know everything in the ins and outs to it. That's just what's worked with her and a couple of clients that I've worked with after that as well. But I mean, again, in her case, it is a little bit tricky because it started to come back again. I don't work with her anymore, and I don't live with her anymore, obviously in Denmark.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things that it's an unfortunate, never-ending battle. But you can only kind of do as best you can. And I think as more people start recognizing this as a legitimate condition, and the same with, polycystic ovary syndrome, once they start recognizing these as very genuine and frankly quite common issues that women have to face, there's going to be more research put into it, which is then going to lead to long-term help.
Yeah, 100%. And I know a lot of people who haven't been able to fix it naturally, or at least get the symptoms under control, and the only option is surgery, where whatever happens, the surgery is needed for whatever the symptoms are to fix this, right?
Yeah, it is really unfortunate, because if you do get to the point where, say, if you are misdiagnosed and you just fed painkillers, and then you do get that one doctor who goes, oh, hang on a second, no, this is a thing that's been happening for a while, and if you look here, you've got endo here, it can get to the point where you have to actually, remove your reproductive organs if it gets that bad. And at least for myself, if I know I had to, flop my wang out and cut it off, you're not going to feel much of a person, really, right? Because at the end of our primal existence is to exist, to reproduce, to continue the species. So there's going to be that deep down feeling of just not being enough. But if we can catch it early enough, then you should be able to kind of get on top of it. So it's it's really unfortunate.
Yeah, 100%, mate. And obviously, like, you're speaking, when you say like you're gonna feel like you're not enough, that's not you saying that people aren't enough. That's from what from conversation you've had with people. That's how they feel after it. You're not putting words in people's mouths that they shouldn't feel enough. Just to put that disclaimer in there. The guy's not being a dickhead.
I don't need people coming to my Instagram to cancel me. I'm just saying that from the people that I've spoken to, that they do recognize with the idea of being able to reproduce and just having their body intact, more or less. It just adds to that. Yeah, I'm not saying that if you can't reproduce, you're not a person. I'm not saying that at all.
Yeah, 100%. Just had to throw that in there so you don't get any hate mail after this. So, mate, thinking about other things now that you posted recently, and people can dig into more detail. This is going to be very brief, but obviously you've put up quite detailed, like, carousel style posts on your Instagram lately. You've done a few books about different types of training for females and different things. But let's talk about another one, which is huge, which, like, this is worldwide. It's not like hush hush anywhere. It's PCOS, right? Like, no matter what country you go to, it's a massive thing now. If you live in the UK, Ireland, if you live in US, if you live in mainland Europe, if you live in Australia, like, doctors know about this. Tons of people have it. What is it?
Polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS. So it's essentially, you have to have 2 of 3 of these symptoms to be technically classified as PCOS. So it's either cysts on your ovaries, it's either high androgens, so like higher say testosterone, for example, and then there's a third one, which is an inconsistent menstrual cycle, or like spot bleeding and things like that. So if you fit 2 out of 3 of those, you're then classified in a PCOS, or as polycystic ovary syndrome. But then there's subcategories to that as well. And again, that's where the science kind of stops and they're looking into it, because there are these different kinds of PCOS, and say some people say that going gluten-free and dairy-free has helped their symptoms. I've got an old client who I still keep in contact with, and she told me that she cut both of those out and she's feeling fantastic. But then if you look at the literature, they then say that there isn't any indication that changing your diet, or at least going gluten dairy-free, shows that there's any kind of change in symptoms. But because there's so many different kinds, I personally believe that, potentially going gluten-free, dairy-free can help with some, depending on kind of what you have. And then obviously, like, resistance training, making sure that you keep your carbs at least initially low and kind of build them up to find that kind of tolerance. Because again, your insulin spikes and messing with your hormones a little bit. But yeah, it's one of those strange ones, and it's like one in 5 women have a pretty severe PCOS, or at least show symptoms of, and 1 in 5 have it, and then 1 in 10 have serious, life-affecting symptoms. So it's one of those things that really does need to be researched. That's for sure.
Yeah, 100%. And I think a lot of people like mistreat the diagnosis and the sort of self-diagnose that, oh, I've got cysts on my ovaries, then that means I've got PCOS, when that's not necessarily the case. You have to have 2 of them. It's like an umbrella sort of term, and whether it's right or not, that's the current way it's diagnosed at the minute, is that if you got cysts on your ovaries, that's not enough. You've got to have either, like you said, the different irregular cycles, whether that's loss of cycles or like all over the place random cycles, or the high androgens. You've got to have all of them. And you might never have cysts on your ovaries. You might just have high androgens and an irregular period as well, which means that you are in that bracket of having PCOS without ever having cysts on your ovaries, right? But I guess it's the cysts on the ovaries that is probably the biggest concern for people, because bringing it back to the reproductive side again, that is potentially something down the line that can hamper the reproductive system in your efforts to have a child, right?
Yeah, 100%. And it's one of those things where you can get it kind of surgically removed if you can get in there with like a keyhole surgery. But it does make it really hard. But yeah, as you said it perfectly. It's one of those things. It's the same as, I think you probably remember the trend maybe like 5-7 years ago, where everyone thought they had either like an overactive or an underactive thyroid, and that was the reason why they couldn't lose weight. I think in like the female specific side of things, it's one of those things that you do need to go to a physician to get diagnosed. You can't just self-diagnose, because they can help you. But if you do have it, then it's one of those things that can be really serious and may slow down reproduction.
Yeah. And one thing that might happen as well is you could go for a normal ultrasound when you're having a baby, and the sonographer could say something along the lines of, oh, I noticed there's a few cysts on your ovaries, or just get checked out, that it might be PCOS. And that can cause huge high levels of stress. But well, for starters, you're having the baby, so that side of it's covered. But if you're worried about having PCOS, but you might not have the other 2 things to go alongside it. Yes, you might have the cysts there, and somebody might see it on a ultrasound, but that doesn't necessarily mean you've got it. So don't start panicking as soon as a sonographer like mentions cysts on your ovaries and think you've got this. Get it confirmed by having the blood test done, obviously if it's safer than your pregnancy, which I assume it would be, and get it confirmed with that full diagnosis about your periods or potentially the androgens. And obviously you won't be having a period if you've got your baby there, so it would be if you got cysts there, maybe get your androgen levels tested as well, your hormones tested, and then wait and see afterwards if you get a regular cycle or completely lose your cycle there as well. So just don't panic, because the stress is probably going to cause a whole cascade of other shit in the body that we don't want to happen.
No, that's it. This is gonna be a snowball. But yeah, it's interesting being in this age of information, right? Like there's so much information that's out there. I think a lot of people do go on the internet to kind of self-diagnose, which it's good to look into symptoms, and it's good to be aware of these things. And that's kind of my main aim with a lot of these things. When I'm posting on social media, especially when I'm talking about endo or if I'm talking about PCOS, it's to make people aware of the symptoms so they can maybe go through a bit of a self-checklist and be like, okay, well, yeah, I've got that one. Maybe I might have that one. I don't know. Yeah, it's probably a good idea to go and get it checked out. And it might just lead to a bit of clarity. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, especially with clients that I've had either in the past that have come back to me telling me about, this is what was happening. Having PCOS, having endo, firstly, you're going to be hugely bloated, or you can be hugely bloated. So it's going to hold you back as far as the health and fitness goals are. So getting these things checked out are going to give you some answers. And even if you go and get it checked out and you have to maybe take a bit of a step back as far as, health and fitness is concerned while you go through maybe like tests or surgery or things like that. I mean, I'm not going to put words in anyone's mouth, but I would feel that would be optimal, at least knowing that, hey, there's something that is preventing or something that's kind of holding me back here, as opposed to why am I not getting these results? Everyone says I should be able to get results just by doing, calorie deficit, right? Calorie deficit, eat less, move more. If that's not working for you, then you're just like, oh, well, I must be doing something wrong. I feel terrible. What am I doing wrong? Am I not good enough? And then, like you said, that it gets into a snowball effect and you start stressing yourself out. And then that can start leading to depressive thoughts. And then that's going to have its own effect. So just because it's something that may slow down your progress doesn't mean that it's not something that you shouldn't go get checked out.
Yeah, 100%, mate. And final little point on that as well, because it ties in nicely. Like, just because you see somebody else achieve something with PCOS, don't just go and like copy what they do. Like, for example, my client, Mary, who's on the podcast, she probably openly spoke about this, so I'm sure she wouldn't mind me mentioning it now. But she's got PCOS and she got pretty shredded, probably the best photo shoot like I seen that year in terms of clients. Maybe my best photo shoot ever. I'm really proud of her for what she did. But some people seen that when I posted afterwards that, Mary smashes a shoot with PCOS. Like, people are like, oh, what does she do for PCOS? How do you manage it? And like, every case is different. So what worked for her might not work for you. And if somebody signed up with me tomorrow who has PCOS, it's a case of finding what works for you in that scenario, like you said, and getting tested, making sure you've got it. Do you have high androgens? Have you got the actual diagnosis, or have you got just cysts on your ovaries, or, what works for you within that? Because it's so individual and it requires an individual approach. Like, if you went and you did the exact same thing with the endometriosis client again, like on a new client, it might not work. You might need to find something else, and you will probably get to the bottom of it eventually, but you're not just going to have a template that this is what works for endometriosis clients, or this is what works for PCOS clients. It's 100% individual, and that's where the coaching will come in from you to make sure that, they are working towards it in a safe and effective way and working out what actually works for their body, right?
Yeah, for sure. I remember when I was doing my initial kind of research, and the only reason why I remember this is because I've stumbled across it again, maybe like less than a week ago. There was this Instagram page who kind of promotes this, oh, I can fix your PCOS. Firstly, if someone comes and they're just like, I can fix this, no matter, like, if they don't know who you are, especially when it's something to do with like a reproductive issue like that, run. Like that, That is your first sign of just run. But yeah, this page, they promote, okay, take CBD oil, drop your carbs, no carbs, no gluten, no dairy. And they had some weird exercise guideline as well, which is 90 minutes of HIIT training per week, but no more. I was like, okay, well, that's really interesting to kind of like, do you do it all at once? But anyway, because there isn't that strict guideline of, okay, there's this kind of PCOS, there's this kind of PCOS, to deal with this one, you need to do this. Because that's not there, it's about just being educated on how you can kind of navigate, or what the general recommendations are. And then kind of finding stories of, how people have helped with theirs, and kind of mushing that all together. So you go, oh, okay, well, this isn't working for them. We've cut gluten, cut dairy, that hasn't worked. But I remember this story where this lady said that this might have worked for her, and that would kind of make sense because of this. Like, if you understand the picture, at least in somewhat, you can kind of make educated connections and maybe help people. And that's, where a real professional kind of comes in. But it's kind of, you have these guidelines and you can kind of mix and match and try to fit them to the person. But like you said, with Mary, for example, it's just because she worked so well, it's not necessarily going to help with someone else, because she just had a certain kind of PCOS that maybe other people may not have, that are looking at the same image.
Yeah, exactly, mate. Exactly. So we covered those into pretty good detail, I think. What else stands out as something that you see often enough that warrants us talking about it now? What's a big thing? Is it going to be menopause? Is it going to be like a quick touch on birth control? What do you see as the big issues that we can tackle, if we're going to pick one more here now?
Okay, well, there's one that I've actually been kind of diving into recently, and it's just the amount of females, like how much they're eating for the gym.
Yeah.
And like their day-to-day lifestyle, especially with Instagram being out there right now, it's more than prominent especially with a little stint that I've done kind of helping out in Hollywood. Like eating disorders are just like on the rise because of Instagram, because of this like highlight reel that everyone kind of posts up. And I think like you see so many people that are posting, hey, I do this workout, but then you see them posting, hey, I eat this, and then you see them going for like 2-3 hour runs and stuff like that. And like I look at it not necessarily impressed. It's kind of just like how long is your body going to last doing that? Like there's a difference between kind of like thriving in life and, you know, getting the best out of your performance in the gym, but then, you know, your hormones, your emotions, how you deal with stress, your work life, everything that is thriving in life. But if you're just focusing on eating for the gym and, well, more to the point, not eating for the gym, it's going to be this tumbleweed cycle. And before you even start seeing these like drastic effects as far as kind of eating disorders are concerned, people say like their periods stop, they're not going to be seeing any results in the gym, there's going to be chronic fatigue, and all these sort of things are driven, I think, by how people perceive social media. So what I've been kind of looking into at the moment, and I've talked with a performance psychologist and I talk with a female psychologist, and I get lessons from them kind of week to week, because I'm trying to figure out a way that you can kind of put that information out there without it like stepping on anyone's toes, so to speak. It's it's unfortunate. And I think a lot of people see the stage as kind of like this, I want to get on stage because I want to have this good Facebook photo, right?
Yeah.
But that in itself, like, I mean, you've trained fair few people kind of getting on stage.
Yeah.
And maybe not necessarily your clients specifically, but like how many people do you see get off stage and then they're mostly either one of two, they're either going to be super lean and they're going to hold that leanness or try to hold that as long as they can, and that comes into its own problems, or they end up just binging out at the end of the show, and then that leads to years of unhealthy habits, right?
Yeah, 100%. That's the two outcomes, right? It's either, well, there's probably three outcomes. There's where the coach that they've got, they trust the coach enough where the coach maybe bumps them up to recovery, calories, maintenance calories, then reverses out slowly and you stay as lean as possible while still focusing on health and performance. Or like you said, there's the opposite where it's you want to stay super lean, so the coach does what they can, but like most people take it probably too slow because they're trying to stay too lean, which then has it's like you said, the negative side effects of being lean for too long. Or the opposite where it's like, I've been deprived. It was your choice to do the prep in the first place, but it's right. You're deprived for so long that you then have a binge that you can't control. And I'll talk about a meal specifically. I know a guy who I think he either won his WBF pro card or he was like second place. And the following weekend, he was like 15 kilos heavier and he had pitted edema in his ankles. He just basically binged and ate all the food he wanted to, but he didn't drink enough water. And yeah, he was asking, I was on a course for the next weekend. He was saying, listen, I had this thing and I had this water in my ankles. And the guy was like, how much water did you drink after you got off stage? Did you rehydrate? He was like, nah, I just smashed a ton of food and probably, drank Diet Coke or whatever. And literally 15 kilos in a week. Like, wow. And that can happen to females, males, whatever,
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah, and there's no discounting the effect it has on men as well. I mean, with the adjudicating that I did for the IFBB when they come through for the Josh Ninowitz Classic, I follow a lot of those guys because, like, well, you guys are like, I want to see how you guys are training, right? Like, I want to see what you guys are doing, getting into prep and that. And the ones that do it as kind of like a career, they keep it moving. You see that, they'll go through their off season or their improvement season and get back on stage. But the ones that kind of just do it for that one blimp, you see a lot of them kind of trickle off into that binge cycle. So what I've been doing as a coach, no coaches are perfect. And one thing that I've tried to actively stop myself from doing is celebrating weight victories. So even if a client, like their goal is weight loss, right, and they lose a couple 100 grams, instead of me going, hey, that's really, really good, and then they put on a couple 100 grams and I'm like, hey, look, don't worry too much about the scale. This could be happening. I'm kind of creating this bias of, oh, but if the weight's going down, it's good. If it's not, then then there's something kind of wrong with it. So looking at non-scale victories, if you're coming out of a prep or out of a competition, it's a little bit different. You know, that's like the 1%ers, and they need to have their own protocols. But I think for longevity and to help people kind of getting away from this, oh, why don't I have abs? Or, you know, why am I this weight when I want to be this weight? Finding that perfect balance of, okay, I can operate as best as I can while, you know, hitting my performance goals, and while feeling best. If you can kind of hit that trifecta, that is what people need to, or I feel people need to start considering as optimal, instead of, how come you can't see my abs when I put this filter on Instagram, but then this person puts this filter on and then they've got abs? Or you can see this line down there, like separating their glutes and their hamstrings, but you can't see it on me. I think a lot of it just comes down to people's perception of success markers. So if we can change that, then I think that's when we're going to start kind of getting down somewhere really good.
Yeah, 100%, man, 100%. And that's pretty massive. Yeah, just like that whole mindset shift to celebrating more than just the scales, right? And I posted that shirt today. People might have seen it. This is Wednesday, we're recording, was by Luke Tulloch, talking about how if you're going to weigh yourself, make sure you do it more than once a week, because all you're going to see is your weight on that day. You know, it might be a high day, it might be a low day, it might be where you're averaging out for the week as your normal. But if you don't take an average for the week and you're just going off one data point, then, you know, you've no other input as to what your weight's been doing for that whole week, just literally what it's been doing on that one day. And with the amount of fluid balance and different things that go on, you could be dehydrated one day and then super hydrated the next. Like, it can completely throw off the scales, right? And like, if we get too bogged down in that, then, especially for females, because females fucking love the scales, and that's fine. Like, if that's what you want to have as your main progress marker. But if you're putting all your value in that one day where you jump on the scales on a Saturday, Sunday, or whatever day your check-in day is with your coach, and then you're like, oh shit, you know, I've had a bad week, when really maybe you've just jumped up a kilo overnight and you've been averaging out less than that over the week, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And again, you know, guys have it easier. you can weigh in, and that's going to give you at least a rough idea of maybe not what's happening on that day, but maybe like that day and like a day or two prior, or if you've had like, you know, a big weekend or whatever. But especially with females, like even going through like a standard month, when they get into the second half of their cycle, or the luteal phase of their cycle, and estrogen drops, progesterone rises, and then as estrogen starts to kind of pick back up, you're going to start holding on to like a lot of water, because estrogen and progesterone, they start fighting for different receptors in the brain, and they're going to start releasing sodium. So you're going to start holding on to water. So even if you weigh yourself, say, halfway through your cycle, and you weigh yourself the next week, you may have been on a deficit. And as far as actual fat mass, you've lost a bit of fat mass. And as far as exercise, that in itself is kind of another conversation. The exercise might have dropped because recovery is a little bit slower. But because they're holding on to so much water, the scale is going to go up. And then they're going to look at that. And again, they start getting into their head. So not even like and I did see that post by Luke, and it was a really good post. I love how he's putting out a lot of that content lately. But looking at it as kind of like a month, or at least as long as your cycle, some cycles, you know, go out to like 35 days or so. But if you start diarying, and I tell all my clients, every single female client I get, you need to track your cycles, because when you start seeing these patterns, that's when you can start getting a little bit more of an answer from what the scales are saying. So if you notice that, even if it's not 4 weeks, let's say 6 weeks, right? Let's say they have like this hyper long cycle, it's like a 7-week cycle. They get to that 6th week, and again, progesterone and estrogen are up nice and high. But then again, in another 6-7 weeks, they notice there's the same trend. They're going to get a bit more of an answer as to why the scales are starting to kind of float around. So you start weighing yourself as an average over that month, or your menstrual block, we could call it. And then you're getting more answers, and you're going to understand, okay, look at month 1, week 1, and then month 2, week 1. Oh, okay, yeah, there is some difference there. I am tracking progress, instead of going even week 1 to week 2 and then going, oh, hang on, no, nothing's working. I need to change something. Where you like I said at the start, you're kind of measuring a different you for each week of that phase. It's not fair. And yeah, it starts kind of getting in people's heads, because like you said, a lot of people's self-worth is almost tied into the number on that scale.
Yeah, 100%, mate. And something that I do is, well, often I will spot that somebody's time of month is coming before they do, because of how they're presenting with their measurements and their weight or whatever. They'll maybe be freaking out, but it hasn't came yet, right? And they don't have the body awareness at the time to know that that happens every single month. So what I'll do sometimes is, if I see that happening, I'll question them. There'll be nothing on their forums for feedback about time of month. I'll be like, this is weird. You know, we're tracking quite well. Let me see. And all I do is, it's a 12-week tracker that we use. And above the box above, I just literally change to red to mark as potentially time of month. And I said to them in their feedback video, I'll be like, listen, I'll put this in here as red. If I'm wrong, just delete the color out and we'll mark it up again. But then that means we've got a reference point where, if we're tracking the trackers over 12 weeks, we can look in week 2 was it time of month. Then week 6 is time of month, perfect 4-week cycle. Then we can look back and be like, okay, you got this then. It's probably going to be the same now, right? And some people will track it. And that's just my simple way of doing it. And, you know, sometimes I'll throw this out and there'll be nothing there. And then I'll literally get a message the next day saying, oh my God, you're right, I just got my period. And it's like, it's just teaching women to be more, and that's not me putting women down that they don't know their bodies, but if you don't track, if you don't track something, you don't know what the fuck's going on with it, right? If you don't track it, you can't measure it, right? So whether it's just, like I said, a simple tracker or a note in your phone saying period started on April 21st, you know, and then period started on May 24th, you know, whatever the date is, or you can get an app like Flow, or if you're doing it with a coach, you could literally just, I use Google Sheets, so it's easy to change the color of it. It's just like a spreadsheet. You could do a million different things to know it, but if you don't know what's happening inside your body, what's your average length of your time a month, or you don't track anything like this, then it's not going to sit very well with you, you know? Like, for example, you then go to try to have a baby, right? You're trying to work out when your ovulation date is. Yes, you can use an app, but if you know I've got a 4-week cycle, then you can pretty much use the app, and before it works out when you're due to ovulate, and tell you, oh, it's go time, go and have sex as many times as you can in the next couple of days. Like, unless you do that, like, if you know it's going to be 4 weeks, and you know, okay, it's going to happen during this week, my ovulation is going to be roughly around this date, before the app even tells you, you're going to know in advance, right? So it's going to have loads of things down the line. And there's apps like, I think there's one called Flow, which basically tracks the women's periods. I'm not sure if it does the ovulation and stuff too. You can just use a period diary. Some of them just have where you can type in an entry saying period started on this date. Like, is there anything like that you recommend with clients? It's maybe not the big apps like Flow.
No, I get most of them to use Flow. I just try to get them to be a little bit more mindful. So even like putting like a diary next to their bed, you know, make it as easy as they can to actually track. So as they kind of go through their cycle, it's really good to know when that sort of stuff's happening, and you can kind of track back and look at, you know, when you've had it and when you start seeing a pattern. The great thing is, I mean, it sounds a little bit laborious. If you make it as easy as you can, like you said, that Flow app's really good. Putting it into like a Google spreadsheet, or just writing it on a piece of paper that you keep next to your bed or under your contraception or whatever it is. So you wouldn't be using contraception if you're having your period, right? But when you start kind of noticing these things, the body starts down-regulating in the second half of your phase, because you're like you're going into like a nurturing phase, right? Just in case you were to get pregnant, your body wants you to kind of slow down and start taking in a little bit more carbohydrates to potentially fuel this child that you could be carrying. But the awesome thing happens is, when there isn't a child there, you've got this kind of window of 3 to 5 days being your period, when you've got these hormones that were rife and ready to go for producing a child and starting to develop a fetus. But they're sitting there. You're not going to day to day drop all these hormones. So you've got these hormones sitting there that you can use as like this performance drive. And the amount of clients that I've had that start tracking their cycles, and when you start seeing this little bit of kind of like a habit coming, a bit of consistency, I mean, it can be a little bit hard trying to get into the gym to train when you've got, you know, menstrual cramps and things like that. You might not be feeling it, but if you can get yourself into the gym, you're very, very likely to be able to push like a very strong PB. Using my girlfriend again as an example, we went out for a run a couple of weeks ago, and she was averaging, I think, like a 7. She might not like me saying it because she thinks that she's running slow, but around like a 7-minute 20 per K split. And then we went out running, and I was like, hey, I just want to run a little bit of experiment on you, because I know this is kind of where we're sitting in your cycle at the moment. Let's just go for a run. I just want to see what happens. And she ended up running, I think, like a 6:48 or something like that. And she'd never been under 7s, let alone 12 seconds under a 7-minute per K. And she got back and she's like, I've got so much energy. This is insane. So if you actually track these things, like it can be a little bit laborious, but it literally is a superpower that women are kind of holding on to. And just a little bit of comfort in knowing that, hey, this is what's happening with my body. This is how I should be pushing it. And then you start kind of tailoring your nutrition and start tailoring your exercise to it. And you can push yourself further than you ever thought you could, instead of you kind of getting down to the dumps about not being able to perform, because your body's down regulating you to perform. Like you're kind of going against your hormones. And I mean, I've never met anyone that can out train their own hormones. It's not how it works. The body's always going to win, right?
Yeah, 100%, mate, 100%. And that's ridiculous. Like, and it's a real world example of how you can just experiment on your body. And actually, I ran like, well, that would be an average of about 30 seconds faster than she was normally running. Like, 20, 30 seconds. Like that's a big jump in performance. And if you didn't know that, like, that would just be put down. I must have just felt really good that day, but you can actually relate it back to, the reason why I'm doing this experiment is because it's this part of your period or whatever, so that's pretty fucking cool, man. And like, people can experiment in their gym, and like, do they lift better, do they lift worse, depending on what time of their cycle they're at. But like we say, if they don't start tracking it, they're never going to know. So ladies, if you're listening to this, like, we're not talking down you, obviously you don't have a period, but it just might be helpful if you start to track this thing.
For sure.
Yeah, for health reasons as well, of course.
Yeah. I mean, it made me look like shit as well, because we would normally run together, and then she's trailing out in front of me, and I'm like, what's going on? So it's it's something that you really need to. I wouldn't say that you need to. I mean, obviously you run your own race, you do you. But if your aim is to get the most out of your training and to get the most out of your nutrition, and to just understand kind of what's going on with your body, so you may have these more answers throughout the month. I can't find a reason, apart from just not wanting to do it, to do it.
Yeah, fair enough, man. I think that's a big way to end this. So let's round it out. We've been on for pretty much a full hour now. Probably about 50, 55 minutes that has been this episode. So that's cracking, mate. And
time goes fast when you're having fun.
Yeah, exactly, mate. Exactly. And I mean, I think this is great. We came on we're just going to talk about coaching females in general, and we just kind of went down this female health orientated episode, which has been fucking fantastic, mate. And I need to work out what we're going to title this, but I really thank you, because you stepped in last minute. I had to cancel another podcast guest. I did have you lined up for season 2, which is starting next week. But you jumped in last minute, and I think this is going to be a banging episode to finish the first season on. There's 2 more episodes of this one, which will be out tomorrow, Thursday. And then there's just going to be a fun one that I'm doing with 2 friends for the anniversary one. So this is going to be the last sort of educational one. And I think it's been an absolute fucking banger for it. So I can't thank you enough for coming on at last minute notice, moving it forward a few weeks. And guys, let's give Caelan a big thank you for doing that. And let's go follow him on Instagram and actually check out these really cool infographics and the female specific stuff he's been pumping out, because this whole month he's been doing it, and you can go catch up on the stuff. So what's your Instagram, Caelan? I know what it is, but just shout it out yourself, and we'll go from there.
All right. So yeah, I've got an Instagram, obviously it's CPT_Perth, because, one day I want to be Mr. Worldwide, but at the moment it's just Perth. And to kind of sum up all this female-based stuff on my website, I have got like a free PDF download for females, and how they might be able to start, changing their training ideas and their nutritional ideas based around their cycle, and kind of how they can make the most out of it. It's called Train Like a Girl. So yeah, check those out. And if you do want to dive deeper into any of this sort of stuff, Dr. Stacey Sims is absolutely amazing. She's got a lot of great stuff coming out at the moment. But yeah, knowledge is power, honestly. That's the last thing I could leave it on. Knowledge is power. But thank you for having me. It's been a blast. Like I said, I love talking about this stuff. I could talk about it all day, but obviously people aren't going to listen to a 6-hour-long podcast.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to get you back on because I do actually have somebody planned to come in and talk about birth control specifically. But I'm sure there's heaps of stuff, and I'm going to keep an eye on your content now. And if I see anything I like, I'm like, dude, I'm lining you up for a future episode. So, mate, keep going with the female stuff. We had a chat about this at the start of the month when you started producing this. I was like, mate, this is really good content. This is your fucking niche. This is who you can really have the most impact with because of your knowledge and how passionate you are about it. And I'm really fucking glad you went all in on it because people have listened for the past hour will know, like, knowledge is there, the empathy's there, the support's there. Like, you're just a really good, well-rounded female coach, and it's really good to see, man. So, like I said, again, thank you for coming on. I hope everyone goes and follows you. Guys, if you're listening to this and you haven't done it, please yet, screenshot this, tag me and tag Caelan on this, let us know you enjoyed this. And if you do like the podcast, smash the 5-star review because then I can get some more quality guests on and keep the podcast growing. We want to be one of the top in Australia at some stage, so let's make it happen. And I'm sure quality episodes like this will make it happen. So, Caelan, thank you for coming on, mate. And guys, go give him a follow and let's go from there.
Thank you for having me. Like I said, it's been great. Anytime.
Thanks for listening to The O Show with your host, Oren McCory. If you liked this episode, then please subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening and share this on your social media. We'll see you on the next episode for more no-nonsense advice to help you supercharge your efforts in the gym, in the kitchen, and most importantly, in your head. See you then.